Rain slicked the pavement as Elvis eased his Cadillac onto the dimly lit station concrete. He hopped down for a cup of coffee, thoughts heavy with echoes from the veteran's home he'd just left. At the pump, a small voice hesitated. "Sir, could you spare $1?" He looked up. A barefoot boy, no older than 10, shirt torn at the elbow, eyes steady but hollow. He didn't ask for food or shelter, just a single dollar. In that moment, under the yellow glow of the canopy, Elvis saw beyond the request, the weight of fear, the stubborn pride. He reached into his pocket, heart pounding, and realized this was no ordinary roadside plea. It was an invitation to change a life, and, perhaps, to save a piece of his own. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The rain fell in steady sheets, turning the asphalt into a slick ribbon of reflected neon. Elvis eased his Cadillac to the side of the deserted highway, its bright white paint dulled by mud splatters and the exhausted toll of miles behind him. It was well past midnight, and the downpour had driven most souls under shelter, save for a lone attendant ticking off receipts in a tiny booth and a single flickering overhead lamp that cast more shadow than light. Inside the car, Elvis's eyes were fixed on the speedometer's needle, now still at 0, but his mind wandered elsewhere. Stages he'd left wet with sweat, voices crying out his name, the endless echo of applause that no longer soothed him. He'd driven for hours out of Memphis, through county lines that carried him deeper into quiet, hoping for a fragment of peace. When the engine quit with a final rasp, it wasn't surprise so much as relief. Here was a reason to stop. He stepped out into the damp air, boots splashing in shallow puddles, and lifted his collar against the chill. He walked to the gas station's single pump and pressed the nozzle to the tank. While the gauge slowly climbed, he leaned against the car's fender, listening to distant thunder and the hiss of rain. A soft voice interrupted the rhythm of the storm. "Sir, you wouldn't have $1?" Elvis turned, looking for a vagrant or roadside drifter. Standing under the station's awning was a boy of maybe 10, bareheaded though his hair was drenched, his thin jacket soaked through to the threadbare edges. His pant legs trailed in mud, and he held something small, an old wrench, or maybe a screwdriver, clutched in one pale hand. Elvis's first thought was, how did this child find his way here? His second, why only $1? He let the pump click off and turned fully toward the boy. "Why are you out here by yourself?" he asked, voice low against the storm. The boy shrugged, eyes downcast. "Mama's gone. Daddy's in heaven. He swallowed, then added, "Need bus fare, or something." He glanced at the Cadillac's gleaming chrome. "Thought maybe you'd help?" Elvis studied him, the hollow cheeks, the slight tremor of his lip. He felt a tug in his chest, a sudden kinship with this stranger who'd stood alone before him. He leaned forward. "Where do you live?" The boy raised his head, meeting Elvis's gaze for the first time. "In the old laundry building, back that way," he said, pointing down the black ribbon of road. "Me and Gran. She's sick. Got no heat, no nothing." Elvis nodded. He could see that battered clapboard structure in his mind. Windows dark except where a single weak bulb strained behind yellowed curtains. "You fixin' cars?" Elvis asked, nodding toward the tool in the boy's hand. "Dad taught me," the boy murmured, fidgeting with the wrench. "He was a mechanic. Showed me how to listen to the engine. Now I watch and learn." Elvis closed his eyes for a moment, rain running down his eyelashes. He remembered his own father's absence, the empty rooms of Graceland when he was a child, dreaming of escape into song. He looked back at the boy and offered a gentle half-smile. "Hop in," he said. The boy's eyes widened. "No, sir. I don't want to bother you." "It's no bother," Elvis insisted. "Come on." He opened the car door and the boy slipped inside, water sloshing from his shoes onto the plush carpet. Elvis settled behind the wheel and brought the Buick's heater to life, the engine humming softly. He reached into the glove compartment, fumbling for something, an old pack of cigarettes and a lighter, before thinking better of it. Instead, he simply sat there, letting the warmth spread through the cabin, and turned to the boy. "What's your name?" "Tommy," came the quiet reply. "You stay here for a minute," Elvis said, and stepped out again into the rain. He walked quickly to the attendant's booth and returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee from a battered thermos. The rich aroma cut through the damp air. When he handed one to Tommy, the boy's hands shook so badly he spilled half down his sleeve. "It's okay," Elvis whispered, sliding into the seat beside him. "Drink slow." Tommy took a tentative sip and blinked as warmth chased the chill away. Elvis watched the boy drink, his own heart heavy but softened. $1 wouldn't solve this, nor any sum. This child needed more. Someone to see him. Someone to care. He pressed the car's radio dial, filling the car with a scratchy gospel hymn that seemed to fit the moment. He looked at Tommy and said, "You know, that song's about hope. You ever heard it?" Tommy shook his head. Elvis nodded. "Well, you're gonna now." They sat in silence, the rain pattering on the roof, the hymn winding through the speakers. Elvis allowed himself to feel the weight of the night, the silent guilt of his absence from so many lives, and the sudden clarity that sometimes what people need most is not a song on a stage, but a friend in the dark. After a moment, Elvis turned the Cadillac back toward town. "Take me to your laundry," he said softly. "Let's see what we can do." Tommy's eyes glistened with surprise and, Elvis dared hope, something like relief. As the car eased back onto the road, even the storm seemed to pause, as if it too was listening to 2 souls bridging an impossible divide under the watchful glow of a lone gas station lamp. Elvis eased the Cadillac off the gravel and onto a narrow paved road that glistened under the ceaseless drizzle. Ahead lay a faint glow, neon letters flickering. Roy's Diner, a late-night refuge for truckers and lost souls. He guided the car into a near-empty lot, its wet surface reflecting the red and blue haze of the sign. The doors of the diner opened with a soft whoosh, and Elvis stepped out, pulling his coat tight against the chill. He offered his hand to Tommy, who hesitated only a moment before climbing down and closing the Cadillac door behind him. Inside, the diner's warmth was immediate and enveloping. The sweet steam of coffee, the low hum of a jukebox playing a crackly country tune, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. A lone waitress, her hair tied in a scarlet scarf, looked up from wiping down the counter. She paused, eyes flicking to Elvis's white coat, then to the small boy at his side. A third glance, and her lips curled into a practiced, disdainful half-smile. "Coffee for you, sugar?" she asked Tommy, her tone clipped. "Hot chocolate? Pie?" Tommy shrugged, glancing at Elvis as if seeking permission. Elvis met the waitress's gaze evenly. "2 coffees, 1 hot chocolate, and a piece of apple pie, please." She clicked her tongue and turned away. Elvis steered Tommy to a booth in the corner, the vinyl seats humid from the rain. "You cold?" he asked. Tommy nodded, rubbing his arms. Elvis watched him, the boy's soaked clothes clinging to slender shoulders, yet his eyes carried more than the wetness of the storm. They held a quiet dignity, a determination beyond his years. The waitress returned, setting steamy mugs before them. Tommy wrapped both hands around his cup, the warmth seeping in. Elvis lifted his own mug, hesitated, and then offered Tommy a sip. The boy's eyes widened, and he gingerly sipped, warmth blossoming across his face. Elvis studied him a moment, then leaned forward. "I know you asked for $1, he said. "But I'm guessing what you really need isn't cash." Tommy swallowed, exhaling fog. "I wanted to buy a lantern," he admitted, "to see in the dark. It gets scary out there after sundown." Elvis nodded slowly. "Makes sense." He set his coffee down, then reached into an inside pocket. He retrieved a small silver cross on a thin chain, one he'd worn since his army days. The metal glinted under the diner's lights. "I used to carry this with me everywhere," he said quietly. "Made me feel not so alone." He unclasped it and placed it in Tommy's palm. The boy's hand tightened around the cross, eyes shining. "Sir, I can't—" Elvis shook his head. "You can," he insisted. "Take it. It's yours now." The waitress cut through their moment, slamming a plate of pie before Tommy. "There you go. Now, pay up." Her voice carried the edge of someone used to grudging service, and the entire diner seemed to still at the confrontation. Elvis rose to his full height, tall and calm, and turned to face her. "I can buy this place," he said, voice low but carrying. "But I'm not going to. Instead, I want you to treat every kid who walks in here like someone's pride and joy. Understand?" The waitress's mouth parted as if to reply. Then she snapped it shut and disappeared into the back room. The hubbub of conversation resumed, now laced with a newfound respect, or at least caution, toward this stranger and the boy at his side. Elvis eased back into the booth. "You know," he said to Tommy, who was still clutching the cross, "sometimes people only see what they want to see. They don't notice you, but that doesn't mean you're invisible." Tommy nodded, blinking back tears that the cross's weight seemed to draw out of him. "Thank you," he whispered. Elvis gave a small, wry smile. "Just promise me you'll keep this safe, and one day you'll pay it forward." They ate in companionable silence, the storm still drumming on the diner's roof. Outside, the neon sign wavered in the rain, but inside that booth, a small island of light glowed. Two unlikely allies warming against the night's chill. When they finished, Elvis stood and offered Tommy his hand. Together, they stepped back into the rain. The world beyond the diner doors seemed deeper in shadow, but Tommy's new cross lay warm against his chest, and Elvis's presence at his side glowed with reassurance. Before climbing back into the Cadillac, Elvis placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Keep the lantern, too," he said, pointing down at the bag in Tommy's hand. "But remember, sometimes the real light comes from inside." As the engine rumbled to life, Elvis watched Tommy follow the puddled road back toward the shuttered laundromat where his grandfather waited. And for a brief moment, the king of rock and roll, haunted by his own shadows, felt a flicker of hope carried by a boy's small, bright faith. He arrived before dawn, the Cadillac's headlights slicing through the mist that clung to the old laundromat's corrugated metal siding. The rain had let up, but the gravel still squished under his boots as he stepped out, coat collar turned up against the damp chill. He paused at the edge of the cracked concrete lot, listening. Only the soft drip of water from the eaves and the distant screech of a freight train passing somewhere beyond town. Inside, the laundromat was deserted. Rows of battered machines sat cold and silent, their paint peeling in curled strips. Faded flyers for missing pets and advertisements for local bake sales clung to every surface. He crossed past a row of dryers, their circular windows reflecting his silhouette in shattered fragments. The air smelled of stale detergent and wet fabric. He found the gap. An old side door left ajar, the latch broken. Pushing it open, he stepped into the dim back room, where wooden crates and cardboard boxes were stacked against the wall. His eyes adjusted to the low light, and there, half hidden beneath a tangle of wires and greasy rags, was a small cardboard box, its lid askew. A breeze rattled the loose panels, as though whispering its secrets. Elvis knelt and lifted the lid. Inside lay a tattered collection of drawings, each one done with a child's earnest hand. Stick figures with impossibly long arms reaching for stars, houses perched on lumpy hills, and familiar to his eyes, a single scrawl of a man in a wide-brimmed hat handing something tiny to a smaller figure. He recognized the gesture instantly. The drawing was signed simply, Tommy, age 10. He pulled them all out gently, spreading them across a dusty work table. They smelled faintly of crayon and damp paper. He traced the lines with his fingertip, absorbing each detail. The wide arc of that boyish smile, the tiny outstretched hand, the sun drawn half over the horizon. His heart tightened at the innocence and longing captured there. For a long moment, he remained still. Then he stood and walked back to the Cadillac, closing the door softly behind him. The engine hummed as he drove back to Graceland. The drawings pressed flat on the seat beside him. Rain-soaked roads unfurled into the pre-dawn gloom, and Elvis stared straight ahead, lost in thought. Back in Memphis, he convened a private meeting with two of his most trusted aides in the dim light of his makeshift study. Candles flickered in cut glass holders, and the scent of tobacco curled in the air. He laid the drawings on the table. "This boy needs more than $1, he said, voice low and firm. "He needs a chance." They listened, the shadow of a question in their eyes. Without fanfare, he instructed them to establish a small fund. No press releases, no photo ops. They would channel money through an anonymous foundation, disguised as a private charitable trust. The fund's mission, to support children like Tommy, who possessed remarkable talent or courage, but lacked the resources to pursue their dreams. He specified the rules with exacting care. Grants would be modest, but meaningful, spent directly on education, tools, or living expenses, never handed to the child in cash. Applications would be vetted quietly, with only the boy's first name and age disclosed. He refused any public credit. "Let it be a quiet blessing," he told them. "Just one kid at a time." As the first seed money was wired to a confidential account, Elvis felt the weight lift slightly from his shoulders. He knew it would not erase the deep loneliness he carried, the burden of bright lights and hollow applause. But it might give someone else a fighting chance. That afternoon, he slipped out again, this time returning to the diner. He pushed open the door and scanned the booths. The same waitress looked up, startled, as if seeing him for the first time. He offered a brief nod, then ducked past her, slipping into the kitchen. She hesitated, then stayed behind the counter, watching as he emerged with a plain white envelope addressed simply to Tommy. He tucked it into the boy's usual booth, on top of that steaming coffee mug he knew would arrive. He paused a moment, glancing at the door as if half expecting to see Tommy's familiar figure appear. But the diner remained empty of all, except the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a police siren. When he returned home, he slipped the box of drawings into a drawer beside his desk, alongside his own battered journals. He closed the drawer quietly, as if tucking a child into bed. In the comfort of his private world, among the fading echoes of the tour bus and the muted applause of distant crowds, Elvis allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He did not need recognition for this act, only the knowledge that, somewhere under the neon haze of that little diner, a boy would wake to something more than $1. And so, Without a footprint in the headlines or a trace on the morning broadcasts, the first chapter of a quiet promise took root, an unpublicized pledge that the king's greatest gift might not be a song at all, but the unwavering generosity of one human heart reaching out to another. He walked onto the stage of the gleaming auditorium with the steady confidence of a man who had overcome more than most could imagine, but his eyes held a glimmer of something deeper, a quiet reverence that no spotlight could ever capture. The rows of seats stretched out before him, packed with faces bright in anticipation. Yet tonight's performance was not for the thousands assembled, but for a debt of gratitude he had carried in his heart for nearly 2 decades. He paused at the microphone stand, the polished silver reflecting the soft glow of stage lights, and reached into his pocket. Fingers closed around a small, familiar object. The cross pendant that had transformed his life on that rain-soaked road between Louisiana and Mississippi, pressed into his hand by a man known to the world as Elvis Presley, but simply Mr. E to the boy who had asked for $1. The audience hushed, sensing something extraordinary was about to unfold. Clearing his throat, he began, voice resonant with the steady warmth of both strength and vulnerability. My name is Thomas Tommy Wilkins. 20 years ago, I was 10 years old, standing barefoot beside a broken-down Cadillac, too frightened to ask for more than a single dollar. Someone noticed me that night, someone who didn't have to. He saw me as a child in need of hope. He handed me this cross and said, "Hold on to this, son. You're worth more than you know." He unfastened the chain and held it aloft. Tonight, that gift is mine no longer. He extended his arm and, in a single fluid motion, placed the cross on the microphone stand. This belongs to every child who's ever felt invisible. May they find someone who sees them. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd as the weight of his words sank in. Behind him, a large screen flickered to life, projecting a photograph from that long-ago evening. There, in grainy black and white, stood a thin, rain-drenched boy and a tall man in white-fringed jacket, the man's hand outstretched in a gesture of compassion. The image dissolved, replaced by a simple phrase, "Everyone deserves to be seen." He took a breath, then continued, "After that night, I grew into the life of a mechanic, just as I dreamed, opening my own garage, hiring neighbors who needed work, giving second chances because I knew what it felt like to have none. But I never forgot the true engine behind my success, the belief of a stranger who gave me not just money, but dignity." At the back of the auditorium, seated in one of the final rows, an elderly woman blinked away tears. It was Lila, the waitress who had worked the diner 20 years ago, the one who'd nearly been fired for treating that boy with kindness when so many turned away. She had recognized Tommy's face as soon as it appeared on screen and had slipped quietly into the back row, uncertain if she should dare come forward. Now, she pressed a hand to her chest as memories flooded back. The hush of the diner kitchen, the tremble in the boy's voice, Elvis's calm intervention. Tommy glanced toward her, his gaze steady. "Lila," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." He nodded, and she managed a small, broken smile, tears glinting in the stage lights. He turned back to the audience. "This foundation," he announced, "will continue its work under a new banner. The E. Cross Foundation, honoring a man who lived in the public eye, but chose, in one quiet moment, to live by kindness. From tonight forward, every grant, every scholarship, every act of compassion will carry this symbol. Because no matter how big the stage, the smallest gesture can be heard farthest." He lifted his hand, pointing to the cross. Let us build bridges of hope, one child at a time. Let us remember that every life, every single heart, matters. Behind him, the lights dimmed to a single spotlight focused on the cross. The auditorium erupted into applause, but it was not the thunderous roar of entertainment. Rather, a deep, resonant ovation for the simple, unvarnished power of human connection. For a moment, sound and time seemed suspended. 1,000 hearts beating in unison for something far greater than spectacle. Tommy stepped back, bowed deeply, and exited the stage with the cross still in place. An unspoken promise that the work would continue long after the lights went out. The final echo of applause faded into a hush pregnant with inspiration, and somewhere in that quiet, in the space between life's bright stages and shadowed roads, the true legacy of a man once called the King found its purest tribute. Not in glittering costumes or record-breaking tours, but in the enduring gift of being seen, valued, and loved when it mattered most.